Because of one of his speaking. So please welcome our speaker, David Burkus.
So I guess to your employees, you're welcome. To the rest of you, just to catch you up, it's one of the grand dilemmas of our time, right? Is that it used to be almost shameful if you took your work home with you. It meant that either you couldn't get it done at the office or that your company was way off balance. And now, if you have a smartphone, you take your work home with you every single night, right? And so the challenge was basically, what are we doing to draw more firm limits on that? And one of the biggest ones for leaders is we got to stop those late night emails. Right? Because I get it, you just want to get a couple things responded to, you feel like you're going to get behind if you don't do it, but when you send that late night email, you send a message that that's the level of responsiveness that you also expect, and that's my big challenge. If you expect that level of responsiveness, right, if you're an accountant and it is April 14th, I get it, right? But think about that. And worst case scenario, if you feel like you're that type of person that has to jump into their inbox at 11:59 p.m., great, just don't click send. If you click X out, it'll save it in the drafts, and there you go. You can send it the next morning. I want to talk about a bunch of different things today. Late night emails not being one of them. That's the end of my rant about late night emails. But really what I want to do is set up a guiding thought for the whole conversation. And the guiding thought is really simple. It is simply this, that great leaders don't innovate the product, they innovate the factory. So my first book was about creativity and innovation and what do some of the most innovative firms have in common, how do they talk about it, and one of the things that I uncovered in that is that we talk often about what it takes to create innovative products and services, and we don't pay enough attention to what happened before those discoveries, before those aha moments. And what almost always happened was a leader or a group of leaders looking at the organization and going, there's a couple things we need to change about how we're working with our people here in order to set that innovation free. Great leaders don't innovate the product, they innovate the factory. I use factory here as a metaphor for anywhere work gets done, but this principle has been true for a really long time. It was true over 100 years ago when Bethlehem Steel, I got to correct one thing on the intro, I'm technically not a native Oklahoman, I was born in Pennsylvania. I like to use the standard joke, though, that I got here as quickly as I could, and that I have a degree from the University of Oklahoma, which is basically a birth certificate at this point. So, but I grew up near central Pennsylvania, near where Bethlehem Iron Works was founded, and over 100 years ago, Bethlehem Iron Works had a problem. Their first problem was that they were named Bethlehem Iron Works, and they made steel. That's a simple branding issue. Anybody in branding and marketing here solved that one pretty quickly. But the bigger problem was that they were making less and less of it. They were losing out to bigger companies, bigger steel producers like Andrew Carnegie, like U.S. Steel. They were losing out to a lot of these places. And so in an act of desperation to figure out how to squeeze out more productivity with less people and less resources. Has anyone ever been there? How do we squeeze out more with less, right? They turned to a man who would become famous for being the very first ever management consultant. The man showed up with what is now his infamous stopwatch and notebook and started studying the production process of Bethlehem Steel, started timing the most productive people, started trying to figure out what were the perfect norms of behavior, the perfect sequential process to produce steel. And to give you an idea of the granularity of detail that this man engaged in, he found out, for example, that the average human male could shovel 7.5 pounds of coal per shovelful for an 8-hour workday, right? Things you would never need to know unless you're on like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or Jeopardy. 7.5 pounds. But that gives you an idea of the granularity. Any more than that and they would burn out, any less than that and they're not maximizing productivity. And so he turned to that process and he did what was known as the first ever time and motion studies, and he really for a long time revolutionized Bethlehem Steel and revolutionized the production process. Now some of you are already nodding your heads because you took Management 101 or Management 130 as they called it when I talked it. You know who this person is. This person is a man named Frederick Winslow Taylor. Right? Frederick Winslow Taylor was the father of modern management science, but honestly, sometimes I like to think of him as sort of that sort of deadbeat dad of management science too, right? Because he had some great ideas, but they kind of outlived their productiveness. Here's an example. Frederick Taylor wrote in his Principles of Scientific Management, wrote that the duty of enforcing the adoption of standards and enforcing this cooperation rests with management alone. Let me translate from 100 years ago to now. Taylor believed that there were two tiers of employees in a factory. You had management and you had labor. Management's job was to think, to set the standards, to enforce the adoption of those standards. Labor's job was to execute. Managers use the brain, laborers use their brawn. If you were in labor and you were thinking, that is not what we want. We want the automatons, we want the cogs. Some of you are like, yeah, that sounds like my current boss. And to be candid with you, that's a problem, right? Frederick Taylor revolutionized management 100 years ago when what we were managing was a very different operation than what we have now. His book is actually still in print. This is my favorite cover of the multitude of covers of Frederick Taylor's Principles of Scientific Management, because it gets at an idea of what we're all feeling now. And Taylor was technically never on the cover of Business Week, but to give you an idea of how far his insights went, devotees of Frederick Taylor started a magazine called Systems. That magazine got acquired by a couple other groups. It morphed, it changed names. Today it's actually known as Bloomberg Business Week, one of the most influential magazines in business, was created basically because of devotees of this Frederick Taylor person. So Frederick Taylor's ideas kick-started the Industrial Revolution and moved us towards an age of prosperity and an age of productivity that we had never seen before. But they also created a problem. That problem is that we don't do the same type of work that Frederick Taylor was writing a manual for. And yet we dragged his ideas with us from the factory to the office. We've moved, most of us, from what I would call a physical factory that Frederick Taylor was studying to an idea factory. Most of us work with knowledge. We talk a lot about the knowledge economy, or honestly, the creative economy at this point. Most employees in an industrialized nation's job, if you really want to boil it down, is to solve problems. Problems that are routine sometimes, problems that customers present, problems that other people inside the organization present, problems that require a different level of thinking. There is not this management thinks and labor executes dichotomy anymore. Labor's job is to think as well. And when we drag scientific management with us from the factory to the office, we create the office, an office space, and Dilbert, and all of these satire pieces around how draining it is to work in an organization that feels like it's still that old school physical factory. So today I want to point out a couple organizations that are doing things a little bit differently, that are actually, I believe, more in line with what Frederick Taylor would do today if we resurrected him and brought him to an organization and said, study it. These are organizations that either found a problem in how they manage people and set to work solving it, or that were willing to look at the traditional ideas around how we manage talent and change it. And we're actually going to talk about the complete flow of talent, from where do you find the best people and make sure they fit, to how do you coach them to improve and better their performance, to what do you do when they inevitably want to leave. One of the surest signs that we've left that factory world is that people don't go to work for a company and work there for 40 years anymore, right? It used to be you work for the state, you pick a company right out of high school or college, you work there for 40 years. At the end of 40 years, they give you a gold watch and a pension. Now, right? Now you go to work for 4 or 5 years from different companies. You get to the end of your 40-year career and they're like, yeah, the watch is gold plated. And funny thing about your pension. So we need to change some of those things. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different ideas today. My challenge to you, there are a lot of companies that we'll run through and talk about today. We'll also talk about the science of psychology that shows why these ideas work. And my challenge to you is not to accept or reject an idea that I present to you on its face, but instead listen to the research behind why it works and then go, how can we do something that's also in line with that, but it may not look exactly like that principle. So to begin, I want to talk about one of the most fascinating things that I'm seeing, one of the most fascinating trends in how we acquire talent or how we hire talent, and that is to hire as a team. Most of us have a pretty similar hiring approach, right? Most organizations is pretty similar. It looks kind of like this. It starts with a phone call, or right nowadays it starts with uploading a PDF onto a random website server somewhere, and if the scanner believes you've got the right buzzwords, they'll call you. But regardless, the first interview, let's say, starts on the phone. And you have that phone call, and a lot of organizations, how many organizations actually refer to this as the phone screen? You know what I'm talking about? Because the goal is basically to screen out the people that are crazy, right? We only called the people who are qualified, so the next step is to eliminate the people who are crazy. That's what we do on the phone screen. If you're not crazy and you are qualified, we'll invite you in for an interview, right? 10, 15, 20 people will come in for a face-to-face interview. And the face-to-face interview is, it's essentially, it's less a big job preview performance thing than it is kind of a first date, right? If you think about it, like you're both trying to present the most polished versions of yourself, right? You're both trying to smooth out the things that prior organizations might have had problems with, right? But if you talk too long about that prior organization you had a problem with, then there's a bigger problem. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. Some of you have been on some really bad first dates, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. Assuming that works well, actually, let's keep the dating analogy going. Assuming that works well, and you interview well with the hiring manager or the person that will be your manager, what happens next? We go to 2 people. We meet the parents. We go to... The rest of you will get that later. We go to the people who are the manager's manager, or who are somehow involved in a supervisory role. And some organizations, these are sort of a ceremonial blessing. And in others, these are like, we're really going to grill them and do the pressure interview here. But then assuming that we choose one person, maybe 2 people out of that, and we give them the offer, right? And then we spend the next 40 hours a week of the next 4 to 5 years of our lives with this person that we've known for 2.5 hours. And sometimes it doesn't work out. How many people have ever been in that situation where it doesn't work out? And now you're struggling with what to do with this person that seemed like a really good fit until we got them contracted, and now their performance isn't working all that well. And then we got to decide, what do we do? Do we invite them to be successful somewhere else? At our table, we were talking about maybe the euphemism we need is, do we share them with the competition? My friend Arthur Greeno is a manager of a Chick-fil-A location in Tulsa, and he always talks about his employees that he likes to upgrade to customer status, because you know they're going to come back. You're just not going to pay them to come back, so you're going to upgrade them to customer status. You have to figure out what to do with those. About a year ago, I was talking to a group of investment analysts, a group of registered investment advisors, and we were talking about this issue of okay, we make a decision based on who to hire, based on like a sheet of paper and a couple sit-down meetings with them, and then they don't work out. How many of you are surprised? And every single hand in the room was raised, and it floored me. Because if ever there were a group of people that would know that past performance is not indicative of future results, it would be the investment people. But it happens there as well. It happens really, really often. And the reason, quite frankly, is that it's just, A, it's not enough time to get to know somebody, but B, it's not actually letting the people who matter most get to know this new employee that we're putting in. So to give you an idea how hiring as a team works, I'll talk about one of my favorite organizations, pre-merger Whole Foods. Why pre-merger? Well, it costs a little, even more to go there now. It used to be like, it used to be whole paycheck. Now it's whole mortgage foods. But a lot of things about their people practices changed. But for the longest time, for the first 20 plus years of Whole Foods as an organization, if you wanted to get a job at Whole Foods anywhere, so we're talking about on the grocery floor or we're talking about in the home office, the company was committed to running as a team. If you wanted to get a job there, you got used to understanding what they called their declaration of interdependence, because Whole Foods runs on teams. Even the CEO position was actually a 3-person trinity, for lack of a better term, of senior leaders. Everybody was involved in a team, and they took this so seriously that the thing that they cared most about was whether or not you fit on the team. So you apply for a job at Whole Foods. Let's just use the store as an example, but again, this policy was everywhere. You apply for a job at Whole Foods, starts on the phone again. You're not crazy. You come in for an interview. We think there's a fit there. We actually go ahead and place you. We find a team for you to join. And then somewhere around 30 to 60 days, it depends on the position, the team that you were placed on votes on whether or not you get to stay. Some of you are thinking, man, that sounds a lot like Survivor. It's because it's exactly like Survivor. Now, lest you think this is really, really super cruel, if the team votes somebody off, then the store manager has a decision to make, or the hiring manager that placed them has a decision to make. Is it a bad team fit, and can we find a different team for them to join? Or do we have to, what did we settle on? Did we settle on invite them to be successful somewhere else? Was that our one? We'll go with that one. Okay, or do we have to invite them to be successful on a whole other organization, right? So you can go with either one, but the reason they do this, and by the way, it takes a 2/3 majority vote to stay, right? So it's not a simple majority, 2/3 majority vote to stay. The reason that they do this is that they've realized that how well somebody works on the specific team we're putting them on has a huge impact, not just on that person and their future, but also the team. John Mackey, the co-CEO for a long time, there's that co-CEO thing again, he split it with 2 other people, would say this: a team doesn't fully gel until it doesn't vote someone on the team. That's a weird sentence, right? It's kind of sadistic, right? Like a team doesn't get along until they kick somebody off. That's kind of mean. What he means, though, is that, let's be honest, every team has standards of behavior. They have norms. Some of them have things they aspire to, right? We called them guiding principles earlier today. Some of them have norms they aspire to or principles they aspire to. But if you have that team and here is the level that you are expecting of performance, of ethical behavior, of commitment, whatever it is, and someone on your team joins and they're down here, if you allow that person to stay, your level's not here. You can say it's here, you can hang whatever motivational posters you want in the hallway, but your standard is here for as long as you tolerate that behavior. And so what he means when he says a team doesn't fully gel until it doesn't vote somebody on a team is that a team doesn't actually know where the standard is until they can see what not the standard is, and they have the opportunity to correct it or get rid of it. A team doesn't fully gel until it doesn't vote someone on the team. Now, as I said, this whole thing seems actually kind of sadistic, so let's get into some research that proves, well, that it is, but that there's a good reason behind it. So a number of years ago, a researcher by the name of Boris Groysberg, which, by the way, is the perfect professor name. Am I right? Boris Groysberg. You can see the elbow patches, can't you? By the way, if you ever want to sound like super smart in a conversation, feel free to attribute whatever you're about to say to Boris Groysberg, because it'll just seem smarter, right? So anyway, according to Boris Groysberg, he wanted to study what makes talent portable, or what blocks talent from being portable. And to do that, he studied the investment world. He studied investment analysts. These are the people that study an industry or a group of companies and make buy-sell recommendations to institutional investors, like the ones that manage hedge funds, pension funds, mutual funds, etc. And there's a trade magazine for institutional investors. It's called Institutional Investor. But it's the other two that really perplex me. Why does the performance decline? Why does the team decline? And it's in the anomaly. It's always in that exception that proves the rule that Groysberg found his answer. There was one type of talent migration, one type of analyst move that talent didn't decline. And that was what he called a lift out. And a lift out is where a firm would say, you know, you're a really talented analyst. We would like to make you an offer to bring you over to our firm. And the analyst had the, let's call it courage, to say, okay, but you need to bring my whole team. And so the firm would lift the whole team that would analyze that industry out and move it over to here, and then it wouldn't suffer. And so Groysberg started looking at it, and what he found is that in investment analysts, and further studies would do this with leadership development, with management as a whole, and in a variety of other fields and industries, what he found is that team talent is always linked to individual performance, and individual performance is always linked to team talent. To put it another way, you might think you're great, but your greatness is hugely dependent upon the people that support you, the people that give you resources, the people that are there to help you, the people that are there to push back on you. We have this idea, maybe it's an American thing, I don't know, but I see it all over the world. We have this idea that talent is portable, that when I achieve something, it's because I'm amazing, right? Or we even talk about it in the business context because we talk about the great leader instead of the great team so often. And what Groysberg found is that how well you fit on the team that you're on has a huge influence on whether or not you actually succeed, on whether or not you're actually productive. So if you think about what Whole Foods is doing, they're not saying like, hey, you know, Kroger, you got a great meat department, we're going to pick that up and move it over here. They're not doing a lift out. But what they are doing is taking a moment to think, okay, the team that this person is put on is going to be hugely important to their productivity. It's only fair to them and to us to make sure there's a team fit there as well. And so the people that are going to work with this person should have a final say in whether or not this person stays on. And that's why this hiring as a team thing works so well. You see this in a variety of other organizations. One of my favorites is Automatic. You may have never heard of Automatic before, but you've probably heard of a product they put out called WordPress. Has anyone, I don't know, been on the internet today? Really? Like everyone here's phone is on airplane mode. For the whole day. Like I'm flattered that it's on right now, but for the whole day. So WordPress is a product that powers about 26% of all internet websites. So if you've been on the internet and you've looked at more than 4 websites today, you have probably been on a product that runs on WordPress. WordPress is a geographically dispersed company, so there is no headquarters. All of their employees work from home or work from co-working spaces and collaborate online and via teleconference and that sort of a thing. And you would think that means that team fit isn't all that important, but to them it actually means it's more important. And so the way that they hire is very similar. They run a trial. If an employee seems like a fit, this is a quote from Matt Mullenweg, the CEO of WordPress, if they seem like a good match, they get the chance to try out for the position, and they run trials. In whatever project team they put you on, you get real access code. So if you're working on code for the website, you get to edit that code. If you're working in customer service, you're dealing with real customers. You're doing that for about 6 to 8 weeks. And at the end of that, the team that you've been working with is surveyed. They compile all of those results, and then they send it off to Matt Mullenweg, the CEO. What I think is interesting is Matt's still doing that final interview. So the original order, right, of phone call, interviews, meet the parents, the original ceremonial blessing interview still sort of happens. But what I think is fascinating is that Matt Mullenweg, even though he wants final sign-off on every hire, he does it via text chat, right? Like texting on your phone or a chat room. For those of you old enough to remember AOL or CompuServe, do you remember those people? All right, I got about half the rooms on that. The rest of you are like, is that like an app? What is that? He does it via text chat, and I asked him about that. Why? I mean, we live in a world where you can have a face to electronic face Skype call with anyone anywhere in the world, and he says, no. I don't want to do that, because if I do that, then I'll pick up on their mannerisms, I'll pick on their background, I'll pick up on their race or ethnicity or gender, right? And I don't want to have that influence my hiring decision. I only care about a few things beyond whether or not they're a fit with the team that they're working on. And I can get at all of those things via text chat. I don't need the extra information. It would only speak to my biases. I think that's brilliant, right? Here's a CEO of a privately held company, has every right in the world to say, I want the final say, and all that matters is who I want to work with. And yet he puts the whole organization, the whole team first in deciding who else is joined. Now, lest you think it only works at small companies or grocery stores, Google, the largest, and ironically, it used to be really cool to talk about Google in the last couple of months. It wasn't all that cool for a variety of different reasons. But I still want to talk about their talent management processes, because these, I think, are still fascinating. When they were going in the early days, as they were adding systems in place, they wanted to do the same thing. They wanted to have one of the 2 founders still have the final round interview, but they needed to build a system that would branch out. And so what they did was they built a system that looked like this. Okay, initial resume screen, call with a recruiter, initial interview with hiring managers, peers, cross-functional managers. Here's what I think is brilliant that they added that I haven't seen any other company add, and so I still have to use them as the example. Interviews with future subordinates. In other words, we believe you're going to be here for a while, you're probably going to go into management. It makes sense then to have you do interviews with the type of people that will be your future peers or your future subordinates, because we want to see if you'll be a good fit for them as well. Now, Google switches teams around every 3 to 6 months, so future is not like what we're thinking in future, it's 3 to 6 months, but it's still a great idea. What if we bring that person in, and maybe not their team, but people who are on a very similar team but would be subordinate to that person? What if we bring them into the process? All of these companies, by the way, have the same thing at their core, which is that they believe that the people who work with new hires should be the ones deciding who ultimately gets hired. They've internalized that idea that talent is a function of the team that they're on, and they've taken that to the core of even finding talent. Before we even make you that final offer, we have an obligation to our people to make sure you're fit with them. And I know this sounds mean, because couldn't the team like play politics and all that sort of stuff? I joked about it earlier, but the truth is it's actually not mean if you think about it for longer, right? When we hire somebody, we're giving them a paycheck, we're asking certain things of them, but don't you think we also have an obligation to them to make sure that they have a place where they can thrive? To make sure that they have a place where they're fully engaged, to use the term from the discussion, to make sure they have a peer group that's actually supportive, right? I mean, sometimes, some organizations, we're going to ask them to spend more of their Monday through Friday with us than their actual family. We should probably make sure that it doesn't drain them, depress them, et cetera. So we owe it to them as well. It's good business sense because it increases that chances of finding the productive employee. But it's also good, in my mind, for sort of moral reasons on what we, as employers, as managers, as leaders, want to be able to give to our people as well. The people who work with new hires should probably be the ones deciding who gets hired. So that's moving into how do we find the best talent? Let's move into what do we do once we hire them. And normally, right when I click over, there's like a clap or two. Thank you. Okay, a couple of you. The rest of you are all HR directors. Is that what I'm to gather from that lack of response? No, I want to talk about, there's a trend going on. You've probably seen it in a lot of large organizations. A lot of smaller organizations were just trying to figure out what their performance appraisal system worked. And then all of a sudden there was this trend towards just abandoning performance appraisals altogether. I'm going to tell you a trick. None of the companies that I'm about to tell you about have actually ditched performance appraisals. They've just replaced them with something that works far better, right? But let's talk about the quintessential example of ditching performance appraisals. The large organization that I first heard about that was ditching performance appraisals was a company you might have heard about called Adobe, right? How many of you have ever heard of Adobe? Right, because you sent a PDF today, right? Your phone was on airplane mode. You didn't touch an internet website, but somehow you sent a PDF today. Great. Adobe makes Acrobat Reader. Adobe also makes Photoshop. Adobe makes a bunch of different tools that they call the Creative Suite now. And when Adobe started, it started back in the age of computers when, I call it the cereal box age. So for software companies, do you remember when you used to have to buy software in a box? Do you remember this? It was like, you'd go to Circuit City. Okay, some of you actually, you'd go to Circuit City and you'd go get Windows 95. And you'd take the big box that looked like it was the size of a cereal box, you'd take it all out and there'd be like a floppy disk in there, right? And then you put the floppy disk in, because it's a floppy disk, you know what to do with it, unless you're under 30, then you have no idea what I'm talking about. My son's 7. My son was watching me work the other day and I was in Microsoft Word, and the save button on Microsoft Word is still a picture of a 3.5-inch floppy disk. And so he was asking me, like, what does that mean? I said, oh, it means save. And he's like, well, why isn't it a picture of a cloud? It's actually a really good point. Wisdom from the mouth of babes. So you used to have to buy it, and it would that piece of software that would fix all the bugs from the last piece of software, right? So you had to get it, which is why there were like Black Friday riots on Windows 95 release date. Right? Because you had to get it, because we got to fix the bugs. Of course, there's other bugs in there, so that you got to get the next one, right? But that's what we used to do. And it used to be, for a lot of companies, their update would be annually or would shoot for annually, and it would be every 18 months, et cetera. And Adobe was one of the first companies to move away from the serial box software movement to the cloud-based movement. What they did was they changed their whole product suite to be subscription-based. And they said, pay us a small monthly fee, and we'll update whenever we release it. You just pay that ongoing fee. There's no need to there's no need to get a floppy disk anymore, which is great because your computer probably doesn't even have a CD-ROM drive, right? And if you got a MacBook, it's got nothing, just a little hole that supposedly you can put anything in and it works or something. I'm still not sure how that one works. So they moved to that subscription-based service, and that led to a discussion around the company. What are the other things that we're doing on an annual or semi-annual basis that should actually be more ongoing? And if you think about it, performance appraisals are a no-brainer in that regard. So very quickly in the discussion, they were talking about, well, we do this annual thing, and it's basically a giant game because you only get a certain number of people that can be superstars, and everybody else is in the middle, and a couple people get shared with the competition. And then we do it again next year, and everybody sort of jockeys for position, and like you go into the negotiation. You all have been here, right? Before I left, went back to graduate school, I worked for, I guess, a company I can't name because of the story I'm about to tell you. But I worked for an organization, and I knew I was quitting in August because the semester was starting, but our annual performance appraisals were in June, so I had to play the game, right? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? In management. No, I see myself on a graduation platform dressed as a character from Harry Potter, but I had to tell them that I saw myself, I had to play that game because otherwise you get the bad performance appraisal and then you've got that, like it's like a scarlet letter A on your suit coat for the rest of your year. You get one chance to turn it around, et cetera. It was this game that was just weird and didn't really give me a lot of what to work on, right? And so they said, okay, let's do away with that and let's see what we can replace it with. And so what they did was they took all of the hours that were normally dedicated to training managers on how to fill out the form and training them on how to have that annual conversation. And they retrained them on how to coach performance on an ongoing basis. They set up a system they called the check-in. The check-in is actually really, really simple. A check-in is any conversation, can be as little as 10 minutes, happens informally, it is not documented other than that it happened, and if a legal issue comes up, we document the legal issue, but it's not a check-in unless 3 categories of the conversation happen. Expectations, feedback, and growth and development. Expectations, the setting, tracking, and reviewing of clear objectives, where are we headed in the next month, in the next 6 weeks, next 3 months, what are your objectives for this project, etc. I see a couple of you taking your phones off airplane mode and taking pictures. Hang on, I got a slide coming for you. Did you just get one photo, you'll get it all. So setting, tracking, reviewing of clear objectives, feedback, the giving and receiving of ongoing feedback and coaching. In other words, the conversation can't just be, here's what you need to do better. The conversation also has to be, what am I not getting you that you need? Right? Or what are barriers that are blocking your performance that it's my responsibility to remove that I haven't removed yet? Giving and receiving of ongoing feedback. And then the last is the opportunity to talk about opportunities. Here's your slide, by the way. All right, oh, get out of the way. All right, and I'll just hang out over here whenever you're done. That's the first time anybody's ever shushed me off. The opportunity to talk about opportunities. Now you understand why I said earlier, by the way, that the conversation is informal, right? Because when it's informal, when it's not documented, you can talk about someone's actual plans for future growth. The opportunity to talk about opportunities and growth and development. You can actually say, what are your plans? Oh, well, my fiance's got 2 years left in medical school, and then we've got to move to here, and so I really can't see past 2 years, but I'd love to be as effective as I can right now. Well, a manager and a subordinate can have a conversation like that now because it's not documented. It doesn't go on their permanent record or anything like that. You can have an open, honest conversation, and you can get them what they need in the moment. And then, as I'll show you in a second, you can be comfortable with the idea that when they leave, they'll still be of value to the organization and you'll still be of value to them, right? But you can only do that if you're willing to have it informal, to have it undocumented, to not have it all captured in some really complex Word document that only lets you fill out half the forms you want to fill out. You ever been there on the performance review sheet, right? Or sometimes it's a PDF, to go ironically back to Adobe. That's the check-in. Now, what I think is fascinating is that there are minimum expectations for how often you have the check-in, but often managers were having them much more often, checking in every month, sometimes every 2 weeks, the minimum about once a quarter. So they're having these conversations more often. And beyond just the open nature of the conversation, the real conversation that happens, the other reason this works so well, right, is perspective. I clicked through something. If you want to see Adobe's results, here they are. You already knew this was going to happen, right? Morale goes up because you're having real conversations. Decrease in employees quitting, but an increase in involuntary departures. That's a euphemism we should have used. Involuntary departures, meaning they're gone, but they didn't want to leave, right? Because in the old annual system, you could hide bad performance for like 10 months. You could do me and be like, I need 2 more months of health insurance, so I better do well, right? You could do that. In the new ongoing system, you can't do that, and so we can share people with the competition sooner. We can invite them to be successful at, we don't care, somewhere else. Productivity goes up, revenue goes up, and the reason I believe, as I said earlier, is perspective, right? When we're doing the annual review system, our perspective is actually really limited. Most of the time, and the research actually proves this out, we're doing an annual review, and what we're really doing is commenting on their performance in the last about 2 months. And then we'll wait 10 more months, right? If we just go from one year to another, we're not giving people enough perspective to change their behavior, right? It's like the equivalent I use, I love this because I'm in Oklahoma, I can finally use a football analogy and people make sense of it, right? The analogy I would use is imagine you're a football team and you take the field and you go play the whole first half and nobody lets you see the scoreboard. And then you go into the locker room at halftime and they're like, hey, great first half. We'll tell you the score next week. Get out there and have a great second half. Wait, what? How do I fix that? right? How do I know what in the world I'm doing? How do I make those little subtle corrections? And we know, because we know at anybody who's watched any football game, what's the number one question we ask all the coaches going in halftime? What are you going to tell them? Or if we can't catch them before, we ask them, what did you tell them? Why? Because in the moment feedback is what changes performance. But it only changes performance when it's in the moment. Right? So breaking it up, doing away with the annual, and having lots of these one-on-one informal discussions is brilliant for that. The other reason that I highlight this is that a lot of organizations that I go to are still, it's actually kind of funny because it's technically over, but are still talking about the M word, the millennials. You heard this word? Right? And the millennial invasion. By the way, it's over, right? It's now Gen Z because we ran out of creativity, and we just are going to keep going with that.